The allegations Meghan has made are simply not true. Her account does not reflect what actually happened, and it has led the public to a deeply misleading impression. That version of events has no basis in...
The room had been tense before Meghan spoke, but nobody expected what came next. With King Charles and Princess Anne only feet away, she turned directly toward Princess Kate and unleashed an intensely personal accusation that shattered the restraint holding the gathering together. Kate froze. Charles went silent. Anne watched without blinking. And then William, after seconds of almost impossible restraint, suddenly lost control, transforming a bitter family confrontation into a royal crisis nobody in that room could ignore. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William had entered the private meeting determined not to lose his temper. He knew why everyone had been brought together. Weeks of unresolved resentment had begun threatening even the most basic family conversations. Charles wanted the disagreement settled quietly. Anne wanted every person in the room to speak plainly. Kate wanted the tension ended without another public fracture. Meghan, however, had arrived carrying something far heavier than frustration. Meghan finally said what she had clearly been holding back. She accused Kate of deliberately weakening her position within the family, suggesting that private reassurance had been followed by quiet obstruction when support actually mattered. In this dramatized account, the closed-door gathering was meant to resolve personal grievances before they damaged relationships beyond repair. Instead, those words changed the entire temperature of the conversation. And Kate did not answer immediately. She remained seated, stunned by how personal the accusation had become, while William watched her fingers tighten together. He knew that gesture. She was trying to remain composed. But the future king also understood something else. This was no longer a disagreement over protocol, invitations, or family expectations. Meghan had challenged his wife's character directly in front of his father and aunt. William pushed his chair back and stood. The movement alone made Charles look toward him. Then came the words. He told Meghan, firmly and with rising anger, that Kate would not be spoken to that way again. His voice carried more emotion with every sentence, and Charles immediately recognized that his son was dangerously close to abandoning the restraint he had promised before entering the room. Anne stayed silent. That silence mattered. The Princess Royal, Charles's sister and one of the monarchy's most senior working members, did not rush to calm William or defend Meghan. Instead, she studied the exchange with unsettling concentration. Her reaction suggested she already knew something about the accusation that nobody had yet said aloud. Charles leaned forward and asked Meghan one precise question. Why had she chosen those particular accusations? The king was not asking out of confusion. He was asking because Kate's name had already surfaced in an earlier dispute, one the family had hoped would disappear without confrontation. Meghan paused before answering. William caught Anne's expression at the same moment, and suddenly his anger gave way to suspicion. This had not begun tonight. Something had happened weeks earlier, something involving Kate, Meghan, and a conversation Anne clearly remembered. William's anger may have exploded in seconds, but the forces behind it had been building around Kate, Meghan, Charles, and Anne for far longer, and understanding those loyalties changes everything about what happened next. Behind every accusation in that room was something more dangerous than anger: history. William was protecting his wife. Kate was fighting to keep her dignity. Meghan believed she had finally reached the moment when silence was no longer possible. Charles was trapped between being a father and being king. Anne, perhaps more than anyone, understood that one emotional mistake could become an institutional disaster. What looked like one argument was actually 5 different battles colliding at once. William stayed standing for a moment longer, anger tightening every word he wanted to say. Kate asked him to sit down, and the request carried more force than any command. As the future king and queen, meaning the couple expected to carry the monarchy into its next reign, they lived under pressure that turned private wounds into matters with public consequences. He finally lowered himself into the chair, but his eyes never left Meghan. Meghan felt something entirely different. She had entered the meeting convinced that earlier grievances had been softened, delayed, or dismissed, until they no longer seemed important to anyone except her. That belief had hardened into resentment. She did not see her words as a sudden attack. She saw them as the end of a long silence. Kate, however, heard something much more personal, and Charles noticed the strain behind her calm expression. Charles leaned toward his son and told him that anger would not repair what had just happened. William answered immediately. Silence had not repaired it either. The exchange exposed a deeper fracture between father and son. The king believed restraint protected the family from further damage. The prince believed restraint had become an excuse for letting old wounds deepen until somebody finally exploded. Anne moved her chair slightly closer to Kate. The gesture was small, but nobody missed it. The Princess Royal, the traditional title given to the monarch's eldest daughter, had spent the argument watching more than speaking. Her movement suggested that her sympathy, at least in that moment, rested with the woman trying hardest not to react. Meghan then changed the entire conversation completely. She said Kate had once made her a private promise and later failed to honor it. Kate's face changed instantly. William noticed. So did Charles. The accusation had acquired a date, a memory, and a history that could be tested. Charles asked when that promise had been made. Meghan gave the evening. Anne's expression hardened because she recognized it as the same night another quiet disagreement had begun behind closed doors. To everyone else, the crisis had erupted tonight, but Kate's reaction revealed that its true beginning lay in one earlier encounter nobody had ever properly resolved. Weeks before William's anger shook the room, another gathering had ended very differently. There had been no shouting, no slammed chair, and no king attempting to restore order. Instead, there had been a quiet conversation after dinner. Kate on one side, Meghan on the other, both believing they understood what had just been agreed. That conversation became the hidden trigger for everything that followed. Because when one promise was interpreted in two completely different ways, suspicion replaced trust almost overnight. Meghan had approached Kate after a private family dinner at Windsor with a request she believed could change everything. Windsor, one of the royal family's principal residences, often serves as a setting for both official duties and private gatherings. In this dramatized account, she wanted Kate to support a personal conversation with Charles about whether she might take part in selected family events again. Meghan was not asking for a grand return. She wanted the king to hear her directly. Kate listened carefully and gave what she believed was a limited promise. She would tell Charles that Meghan wanted the conversation. She did not promise to argue the case, pressure the monarch, or endorse every part of the request. Meghan heard something different. To her, Kate's willingness sounded like support, and that difference in interpretation became the crack that would later split wide open. Meghan felt betrayed when Charles declined to change the arrangements days later. She concluded that Kate had stepped away once the request became uncomfortable. Kate was stunned when she learned what Meghan believed. She told William privately that she had never promised to campaign on anyone's behalf. The prince became furious that his wife was being blamed for words she insisted she had never spoken. Anne had heard enough to know where the misunderstanding began. Near the end of that Windsor conversation, she had entered the room and heard Kate make the distinction clearly. She would pass along Meghan's request, but she would not personally endorse it. The Princess Royal remembered the wording because the tension had already felt unusual. Charles later learned what Anne had heard. Yet the king chose silence, hoping time would cool the resentment without forcing another confrontation. That decision now looked disastrous. Anne finally stated the distinction during the present meeting. Meghan turned immediately toward Charles. Her anger shifted. The monarch had known for weeks that two versions of the same conversation existed, yet he had allowed both women to carry their own interpretation into this room. The argument was no longer simply Meghan against Kate. It was now Meghan demanding to know why Charles had allowed resentment to grow when Anne possessed evidence that could have challenged it from the beginning. The moment Anne confirms what she heard at Windsor, the atmosphere changes instantly. Meghan refuses to retreat. Kate refuses to accuse her back. Charles attempts to regain authority. But William has reached the point where careful language feels like surrender. He rises again, looks directly across the room, and says that his wife's character will not be put on trial because others chose to misunderstand her. Then Charles gives his son an order William does not want to obey. Anne speaks with unusual precision. She says Kate never promised to support Meghan's position. She only agreed to communicate the request to Charles. The Princess Royal, a title traditionally given to the monarch's eldest daughter, is not offering an opinion now. She is describing the conversation she personally heard. That matters because the argument has suddenly moved from memory and emotion toward a version of events another person can confirm. Meghan does not back down. She argues that Kate's words, tone, and reassurance created an expectation of support, even if no formal promise was made. To her, intention matters as much as wording. Kate hears the accusation and stays composed, but William cannot. He steps closer to the table and tells Meghan that disappointment does not give anyone the right to attack his wife's integrity. Meghan meets William's anger without lowering her voice. She tells him his protectiveness has become a barrier, stopping him from understanding how other people have experienced Kate's choices. The prince reacts instantly. He insists that defending his wife is not blindness, and the exchange becomes sharper with every sentence. Kate says his name once, quietly, but he is already past the point of restraint. Charles finally moves. He places both hands on the table and says, "Enough, sit down." The king, as the reigning monarch and head of the royal family, is asserting both personal and institutional authority. William remains standing for one long moment. Father and son look at each other, and the silence becomes its own confrontation. Kate breaks it. She tells William to sit down and obey his father. Her intervention stops the moment from becoming something more dangerous, a direct challenge between the heir and the monarch in front of the entire family. William obeys, but his anger has not disappeared. Charles then changes the purpose of the meeting completely. Nobody is leaving, he says, until he decides how future contact between the two sides of the family will work. And suddenly, reconciliation was no longer the only issue before them. William had wanted to defend Kate. Charles now had to defend something larger, the authority to prevent private anger from dictating the future of the crown itself. Charles had spent most of the confrontation trying to stop emotion from becoming policy. Now that luxury was gone. William was furious. Kate was hurt. Meghan felt unheard, and Anne had openly confirmed the disputed conversation. The king could no longer pretend another quiet reconciliation would solve everything. He reached for the folder beside him, opened it, and began outlining boundaries none of them had expected to hear that evening. But Anne was about to challenge him on one crucial point. Charles steadied himself before speaking again. Within this fictional family dispute, the monarch controlled invitations, access to official royal gatherings, and the conditions under which senior relatives could meet privately. That authority mattered because one careless decision could reshape relationships far beyond the room. Yet William's position as heir, the person next in line to the throne, meant his anger could not simply be brushed aside without creating a second crisis. The king removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He admitted that hearing his family speak to one another with such bitterness had left him deeply disappointed. William watched him closely, still tense. Kate remained quiet, while Meghan sat rigidly across the table. Charles wanted order, but order now required choices that would inevitably hurt someone. Anne refused to let him hide behind balance. She told Charles that avoiding hard decisions had allowed resentment to harden until tonight's explosion became almost inevitable. He reacted sharply, insisting he had tried to protect everyone from another rupture. The Princess Royal did not retreat. She answered that delay had protected nobody, least of all Kate and Meghan. Charles then proposed a new boundary. Future discussions involving Kate and Meghan would no longer happen through spontaneous private conversations that could later be remembered differently. Any serious exchange would take place under clear conditions, with the purpose understood before it began. William listened, but his expression showed that procedure alone would not satisfy him. Anne pressed harder. She argued that treating everyone equally now would ignore who had turned tonight's disagreement into a personal attack. Charles looked toward Meghan. The room tightened again. Meghan understood that the discussion had shifted from prevention to accountability, and Kate finally lifted her eyes toward the king. Charles closed the folder. He told Meghan there would be a consequence for what happened tonight, though he gave no details yet. William immediately sensed the judgment might fall short of what he believed Kate deserved. For the first time, Meghan was no longer defending an old grievance. She was waiting to hear what tonight's words had cost her, while William wondered whether Charles would truly protect Kate when it mattered most. Charles's decision was not dramatic because he shouted it. It was dramatic because he did not. In a calm voice, the king drew a line around the family and made clear that what had happened could not simply disappear once everyone left the room. Meghan listened without interrupting. William barely moved. Kate looked down. Anne watched Charles carefully, and with one restrained ruling, the emotional cost of the confrontation suddenly became real. Charles suspended any further private reconciliation meetings between Meghan and Kate until both women agreed to a structured conversation with clear boundaries. In this dramatized account, a reconciliation meeting meant a private attempt to settle family conflict before it affected wider royal relationships. The king also ruled that Meghan's participation in future private family gatherings would be considered individually rather than assumed. His decision mattered because access itself had now become part of the consequence. Meghan waited several seconds before answering. Her anger had faded into something quieter and more painful. She asked Charles whether the ruling meant she alone was being blamed for everything that had happened. The monarch did not answer immediately. Anne watched her closely, while Kate remained silent. Meghan had arrived prepared to defend herself against hostility, but disappointment was harder to fight because it forced her to consider what her words had actually changed. William broke the silence next. He told Charles that limiting future meetings did not erase the humiliation Kate had experienced in front of the family. The prince wanted acknowledgement, not merely procedure. Kate reached across and touched his arm, asking him not to continue fighting on her behalf. That simple request stopped him more effectively than another command from the king could have done. Kate then surprised everyone. She told Charles that she did not want Meghan pushed out simply to satisfy anger. Punishment, she said, would not correct the misunderstanding that had brought them here. William looked at her with disbelief, while Anne studied the shift carefully. Kate was not excusing the attack. She was refusing to let it become the excuse for a larger family war. Meghan heard those words and hesitated. For the first time that evening, doubt entered her response. If Kate truly wanted retaliation, this was the easiest moment to demand it. Instead, she was refusing it. Meghan began to question whether she had mistaken distance for hostility and caution for betrayal. Kate finally turned toward her. She asked Meghan to remain behind for 5 minutes after everyone else left. No Charles, no William, no Anne, no aides. The institutional fallout had been decided. But Kate was about to attempt something far riskier, facing Meghan without anyone else in the room to protect, interpret, or interrupt either woman. When the door closed, the argument changed. There was no king to make a ruling, no princess royal to verify what had been said, and no William ready to defend Kate at the first sign of another attack. There were only two women carrying different memories of the same relationship. Meghan expected another confrontation. Instead, Kate asked one simple question. When did you decide I was against you? What followed became the emotional turning point nobody outside that room had expected. Kate did not raise her voice. She returned to the Windsor conversation and explained exactly what she believed she had promised that night. She had agreed to pass Meghan's request to Charles, nothing more. Windsor had become more than a residence in this dispute. It was the place where a small misunderstanding had hardened into a much larger wound. Kate admitted she should have clarified her meaning immediately, because silence had allowed suspicion to grow. Meghan listened without interrupting. Then she admitted the deeper hurt behind her anger. The problem was not only that one request had failed. She said the Windsor exchange had confirmed a fear she had carried for some time, that she could never tell when private sympathy would become real support. Kate heard the pain beneath the accusation, but she did not surrender her own truth. Kate answered with equal restraint. She said being assigned motives she did not recognize had made her increasingly guarded around Meghan. Every careful pause had then been read as coldness, and every attempt to avoid conflict had created more distance. Meghan began to understand that what she had interpreted as hostility may, at least in part, have been self-protection. Meghan still refused to pretend every grievance had vanished. She believed the original conversation had been unclear. Kate accepted that criticism. But Meghan also admitted that attacking her personally in front of Charles, Anne, and William had crossed a line. For the first time that night, both women were speaking about responsibility rather than victory, without anyone forcing either side backward. Meghan reached for the door, then stopped. She turned back and apologized directly for the attack. Kate accepted the apology without offering false warmth or pretending trust had been fully restored. The moment was quiet, but it changed the shape of the entire crisis. Kate stepped into the corridor and found William waiting. He studied her face and immediately understood that something had shifted. His anger remained, but now it faced a harder question. Kate had chosen reconciliation over retaliation, but the final test belonged to William. Could the man who exploded to protect her accept an apology she had already decided was enough? By morning, the private confrontation was no longer private. Fragments of the story had escaped the palace walls, stripped of nuance and sharpened into something far more explosive. To the outside world, there was no misunderstanding, no 5-minute conversation, and no complicated history. Only a future king who had lost his temper after his wife was attacked. While the family struggled privately toward resolution, the public was already choosing sides, and one image came to define the entire crisis. William read the morning coverage beside Kate and felt his anger return. In this dramatized account, royal communications staff had issued a restrained statement, calling the gathering a private family matter and refusing to discuss individual exchanges. That mattered because any detailed response could turn a painful family argument into an official battle between royal households. Kate saw the danger immediately. She told him another angry reaction would only keep the story alive. Meghan faced the same headlines from a very different place. She realized that the apology she had given Kate in private was nowhere in the public version of events. The story had frozen at its ugliest point, leaving her defined by the accusation and William by his fury. Meghan understood that once private pain became public spectacle, nuance disappeared faster than anyone could restore it. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered behind barriers as television crews delivered live updates. Buckingham Palace, the monarch's official London residence and a central symbol of the crown, had become the stage for a story that began behind a closed door elsewhere. One fictional newspaper front page shown on camera carried a stark photograph of William beneath the headline, "Royal Fury Behind Closed Doors." The image spread because it reduced a complicated family rupture to one explosive moment. Charles reacted with restraint rather than counterattack. The king rejected competing statements from either side and ordered that no royal household brief against another, meaning no separate palace team could quietly feed damaging claims to journalists. Anne supported the decision because she knew a public war would make reconciliation almost impossible. Charles wanted the family to absorb the consequences without turning private grievance into institutional revenge. Kate then asked William for something harder than retaliation. She told him not to demand harsher consequences for Meghan. The prince hesitated, because restraint now felt dangerously close to surrender. Yet Kate made the choice clear. Peace mattered more to her than public vindication. For William, that distinction would decide what kind of heir he became. The world expected another royal retaliation. But inside the family, William faced a harder test than anger, knowing when defending Kate meant listening to what Kate actually wanted. William had spent the entire crisis believing that protecting Kate required action, confrontation, boundaries, consequences. But once the shouting was gone, he was forced to confront something more difficult. Kate did not need him to win the argument for her. She needed him to respect the choice she had already made. Meghan had crossed a line. Charles had responded. Anne had established the truth. Now William alone had to decide whether anger would remain the final word. William met Kate privately later that day. He admitted that watching her being attacked in front of Charles and Anne had made calmness feel like betrayal. As heir, he knew his conduct carried consequences beyond one family argument. Kate understood the instinct behind his anger, but she refused to let loyalty become an excuse for another explosion. Kate told him protection was not only about stepping forward. Sometimes it meant knowing when to stop. She said he had defended her, but now he needed to respect her decision to accept Meghan's apology and end the confrontation. William listened. For the first time, he admitted that losing control in front of his father had weakened the position he was trying to defend. Meghan accepted the consequences through Charles in a private conversation that day. She confirmed that she would respect the new boundaries and would not challenge the limits on private family gatherings. The king then spoke with William, who told him he would not demand harsher punishment. Charles understood what that meant. His son was choosing restraint, not surrender. Anne later spoke privately with Kate and closed the original dispute with certainty. She reminded her that the Windsor conversation had now been clarified and that the truth was no longer in doubt. Kate answered that being proven right mattered less than preventing one misunderstanding from poisoning every future encounter. Anne accepted that judgment, recognizing that closure sometimes required more discipline than victory. William's loss of control became the most dramatic moment of the night, but it was not the moment that ultimately defined him. The defining choice came afterward, when he stopped demanding victory and listened to Kate. Charles preserved his authority. Anne ensured the truth was heard. Meghan accepted responsibility for crossing a personal line, and Kate chose closure without pretending the wounds had never existed. In this dramatized royal crisis, that became the lasting verdict. Strength inside a monarchy is not measured only by who can command a room, but by who knows when the conflict has finally gone far enough. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.